job. Very, very, very good job.
Is there any chance to balance Dana? He's awfully loud compared with everyone else.
To you?
Yes.
We are the meteorologists of podcasters.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Is that better?
Right. 50%
Incorrect
of the time.
more often than we are correct.
Yes.
And are we still approximately even to you guys?
Yeah, sounds fine.
Close enough.
Close enough?
Let's go.
Okay.
Yeah. Close enough. And I have things that I can use to try to level everything out.
You have things.
Yes. So,
Methods.
Andy, Dave, Tanya, James, can you hear us? We should be
Jennifer and
broadcasting.
Joe.
Hey, look, a little yellow
Hello,
live
hello,
box.
And more importantly, can you hear the Washington detachment?
Yes.
I haven't got them.
Yes. All right.
Dave, we didn't ask you. Where did you come from? The other Dave. Just kidding.
Which Dave? Which Dave
Wrong
are we
Dave.
giving
The wrong
that to?
Dave answered. We're just kidding.
Okay. Wow. This has been fun.
Yeah. All right. Good night.
Sorry, you
Good
guys.
night.
Hey, Jeff, what can I say?
Oh, this is life in the audio world, isn't it?
It sometimes is, yes.
Yeah. No, I'm totally cool with everything. This is fun.
I was telling them that what's really killing me is that the interface I normally use here is out for repair right now. So it's a little bit of a hodgepodge at the moment.
Gotcha.
Just
Yeah.
causing.
Trying to remember how to do everything the other way. Yeah. Okay. Let me make sure that I'm recording. And I don't know what you all are doing in DC, but Steph and I can start the recording.
You might have to mute them.
Okay.
Yes, you're going to have to mute us. We can't mute ourselves.
That's okay.
Holy
All right.
goodness. Some mutiny.
3, 2, 1.
Oh, wait. Sorry.
Okay.
Abort.
Okay, I'm actually ready now.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Clap.
We
It's
didn't.
actually pretty close. I know you don't need to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Robert's got the clap.
Okay. Sorry.
I told
Okay.
you in confidence.
This is take 2.
Okay, Robert. Now the entire world knows.
Well, you know.
Also, deja vu.
Yeah.
Deja vu.
Okay. Let me get to the Evernote page here, and we'll see what happens.
Of the
No promises. No
No.
guarantees.
Didn't do this. Let's see. It doesn't matter what we're doing.
Sounds like flying a Boeing to me.
Sheraton.
I'm going to mute this.
Okay. And today is the what day? The 30th?
Today is the 30th,
That doesn't
Tuesday,
work anymore.
October
Okay. October.
2018.
And I need to do it in sort of a more specific fashion.
Okay. Quiet on the set. I don't know. Is Liz back with us, or is she?
No, I think she
went to bed.
went to bed.
Okay. So we're on our own.
Blame her. Yeah, it's frightening.
1911, 2011. So
That should do it.
we'll say 12 after some hour. Okay. Here we go.
WAPG, it's the Airline Pilot Guy.
Airline Pilot Guy, episode 347.
Yeah, he's up in the sky. It's the Airline Pilot Guy.
Hello, you're listening to the Airline Pilot Guy Show, the view from our side of the cockpit door. I'm Captain Jeff, your host, broadcasting live from Studio 1410 in the Sheraton Studios in Birmingham, Alabama. Today's show was recorded on the 30th of October, 2018.
Yeah, he's up in the sky. It's the Airline Pilot Guy. Put your light and he's flying by. With the Airline Pilot Guy.
In today's episode, aviation news, your feedback, and this week's plane tale. He flies east, flies north, flies west, flies undone. So get all settled in. Tray tables and seatbacks in their upright and locked positions. Electronic devices powered on. Flight 347 is ready for pushback. Yay! Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Airline Pilot Guy Show. It's an aviation podcast that we do weekly. We talk about aviation news and answer your feedback. And also here to help me in this endeavor from her lakeside studio in South Carolina, a doctor, skydiver, marathon runner, strength training junkie, IPA connoisseur, and commercial multi-engine instrument-rated pilot, Dr. Steph.
Hello, Captain Jeff. Great to see you. I'm not sure how much help I'll be tonight, but we'll certainly try.
It's got to be more help than if I tried to do this by myself. That's for sure.
We shall see.
Yeah. And also joining us from the Fairbairn Studios in Washington, D.C., a professional photographer, former RAF, RAAF fighter pilot, current captain for an international airline based in London, Captain Nick.
Jeff, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Lost. We're here and we're starting the show. It's fantastic. The marvels of modern technology.
It's a miracle. It really is. And also joining us tonight in that same studio in Washington, D.C., we have a barbecue master, motorcycle rider, a party boat skipper, and captain for a major U.S. legacy airline, Captain Dana.
Well, great to be here in this wonderful location here in DC area. And I'm actually out here flying. So I'll tell you about that here in a little bit.
What?
No kidding.
That can't be right.
And
All right. Well, great to see you, Dana.
Messenger.
And also joining us, the proprietor of said studio in Washington, D.C. We have a professional photographer, a private pilot, and CIA operative, Robert Fairbairn.
Hey, everybody. It's been a lot of fun this evening and a challenge to say the least, but looking forward to a good show here.
It's got to be better than the first, how long have we been at this already?
I don't know, it sounded great here all night, Jeff.
Several hours.
It's been one of those nights, but that's okay. We're happy because we're actually recording a show.
Wires strewn across my desk. It's going to take a week to clean up.
They're all labeled so they can go back to their appropriate places, I'm sure.
That didn't seem to work, though.
Okay.
Quite a sight, let me tell you.
Anyway, so that's one of those things about doing a podcast. Sometimes it all works out swimmingly, but technology sometimes has a way of kind of biting you in the bottom. So here we are. We finally had this thing on track, and we're going to do our best to record a show tonight. And we're so glad that you're here with us, especially those who are in the live chat room. I think we have some folks in there.
Gluttons for punishment, along with the rest of us.
It must be. It is kind of late for everyone, actually. So we're going to try to go as long as we can tonight, and then. Yeah, that's what she said, right? Okay. So let's see. Why don't we do some catching up? And let's start with ladies first. Dr. Steph, how are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you very much for asking. Trying to think what happened since the last time I talked to you all. I can't remember what day of the week that was last week.
It was like
Wednesday,
Wednesday, I think.
Wednesday, yeah. Well, I had a very lovely weekend. It was my youngest brother's 30th birthday, so he came to town and we went to see Hamilton, which I'd actually seen once before over the summer.
What, you've seen it twice now?
I have.
Unbelievable. I haven't seen it once. I can't
I'm
wait.
so sorry. You'll love it when you do. It's a fantastic show. It was a really nice treat for his birthday because he'd wanted to see it for a very long time. Before I even knew that the show existed, he was talking about it and singing its praises. And so that was a lot of fun, kind of just a whirlwind trip for him, but it was nice to hang out and catch up and just getting ready to head off to New York City in a couple of days for the marathon there on Sunday.
Excellent. So how did the performance of Hamilton compare with the one that you saw you saw it in Chicago?
I saw it in Chicago. No, they were both excellent.
Okay.
Very, very good. Very well done. Just certainly there's always differences between Actors and styles a little bit, but no, they're both fantastic. So if you're in one of those cities where the show is coming to town, one of the touring companies, I would still highly recommend.
Okay. Note taken. All right. So now we mentioned during the intro here that we have two of our regular guests in studio with Robert / Richard / Dick in his home studio in Washington, D.C. And let's see. Let's start with Captain Nick. How have you been, sir?
Jeff. Yeah, well, I've dragged my sorry ass all the way across the Atlantic, and we roared as fast as we could up here to Adams Morgan, including a sprint across a bridge, which Dana managed masterfully. I was very impressed. I never realized he could build up such a head of steam. In fact, the only problem he had was stopping. He was knocking people aside as we tried to get to Robert's place in time. Sadly, the intricacies of a multiple mic setup here momentarily, just for like 3 hours, defeated us. But now we're doing it. It all seems to be working fine. Brilliant to be here. So pleased that Robert could host us. Lovely seeing him. Of course, the great big bottle of whiskey we brought him has had nothing to do with the fact that he greeted us with open arms. And we're really looking forward to having a fine show. Personally, I had a lovely flight out. I came to Washington via Greenland, which is perhaps a slightly unusual route, a long way north to avoid the headwinds over the Atlantic. But we made it in like 8 hours and 10 minutes with an unbelievably small amount of fuel when we landed. That's the way of the world nowadays. I have to say, I was looking at our fuel reserves going, ooh, I hope there's no trouble. And of course there wasn't. Washington managed to get us in at the head of the queue. We even beat British.
Did you declare a Mayday, 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 emergency fuel?
No, we didn't quite get that far. We were very close to going we're minimum fuel, now, which I think is a special call you make in the States when you're right down to you run out of any spare and you really don't want to get any extra vectoring. So we didn't actually have to say that, but we were damn close.
Excellent. Well, we're glad you're here. And Dana, at the last minute this morning, you notified us, I believe it was this morning, or maybe yesterday, that
It was last night.
last night, that you had picked up a trip and that you were also going to be in Dulles, at Dulles International Airport. And so how have you been, sir?
Well, I didn't actually pick up a trip. They assigned me a trip, but that's okay. It's sitting on reserve. That's the way it worked out. But I think a higher power, actually beyond the earthly type, may have actually arranged this setup. And
I had nothing to do with it.
Well, I know, but it was definitely out of
It was me.
I think it was she had everything to do with it. But so I got notification that I had been assigned a 3-day trip, and the first overnight just happened to be one leg to Dulles, and I said, isn't Nick going to be in Dulles tonight? I started thinking about this and confirmed it with my fellow APG co-host, and indeed he, because it was way past his bedtime, that he was indeed coming here via Acme Red. And then I looked at the schedule and his schedule, and I said, well, son of a gun, I'm arriving just about 10 to 15 minutes scheduled arrival later than Nick was. So we were in contact, and he was gracious enough to, the way it worked out, he watched me taxi into Dulles as he was on the people mover in Dulles to customs, and it worked out just about right, where he had waited 2 or 3 minutes for me to come from the gate and come on down. Now, I'm sitting here and thinking about the fact that you were mentioning your fuel state, and coming in here to Dulles, we only had one leg today. Amazingly enough, there was a fight on the radio between an unnamed carrier American and the air traffic controller, because they were holding going into DC on a Cavu day. Clear, severe clear, unlimited visibility, and light winds, and they were holding for volume, and the air traffic controller and the American pilot proceeded to get into it because they were holding, and of course, very much like what Nick just mentioned, they were skosh on fuel. They didn't have an alternate. They didn't have a planned alternate because the weather forecast was clear in a million. So when Nick tells me he's low on fuel, well, not low on fuel, but getting to, oh my, what's going on here? And I'm thinking, okay, here's the radio calls from DC and everybody's holding going into DCA. Fortunately, it wasn't that case for him. I don't think he'd want to particularly try to bring that Airbus 330 fully loaded into DCA on a 69 or was it 7,100 foot runway? I think now it's somewhere around there. They just extended it, so it's been a while since they've been there. But anyways, very fortunate to get this trip to sign, so I can come here and see Nick in person. And had a great ride on the van. Had a very nice conversation with his first officer that flew over the pond with him. And it was really nice to meet his crew and spend some quality time with Nick coming on over here. So really honored to be able to do that. And I'm going to be in Philadelphia tomorrow night, another one of my favorite overnights, and going to have the opportunity, hopefully, as long as I don't get rerouted, to go to one of my favorite locations. That's Monk's. Not that I'm a beer guy, but they have some of the best. It's one of the best beer bars, probably, definitely in the country, but one of the better ones in the world, I think. So that's what's going on with me. I'll probably do a crew log this week. After, because I only flew one leg today, and I'm not going to brag on myself, but it was a fantastic flight because the weather was absolutely beautiful the whole entire way up here. But I'll probably do a cool crew log after I fly the next couple of days to go ahead and update everybody, because I actually did go in the sim last week. I talked a little bit about that on the show, so last week. But I'll go ahead and give a full rundown as to what everything in everything that did happen on this upcoming trip. I'm hoping the weather is going to be good, but Wednesday, actually into Thursday, it's supposed to be kind of cruddy in the Atlanta area. Flying with a brand new FO, by the way. Excellent guy, really sharp. Flew a helo in the Army. He was a Black Hawk pilot, instructor extraordinaire, and really enjoyed the one leg we had coming up here. We didn't stop chatting for 1 minute. So I'm really enjoying flying with this first officer. So that's about it from my side of the world.
Excellent.
Very good. Robert, being a great host there in DC, you've been on the show before, at least once, maybe a couple of times, right?
The one time when you were here.
Just once, okay.
Just once.
Welcome back, and tell us, what have you been up to, sir?
What have I been up to? Well, the continuing saga of my airplane continues, which is what continuing sagas do. And mostly I really just wanted to set a record for the longest delay on an APG episode. So I rigged something up here tonight and,
well,
congratulations.
Great success. Great success.
You get the prize.
Well, we're glad.
A slow couple of weeks here. Actually, normally I travel about 40-50% of the time, and I've been home for almost 2 months now, which is a little bit unusual, but start traveling again here in a couple of weeks. Combination of slow season and some of the trade shows that are usually elsewhere have been here in DC that I work. So I've been sticking around home a lot more than normal, which has its advantages, but it feels a little weird.
Very, very good. Well, thank you again, Robert, for hosting the two hosts that you have there with you.
My pleasure.
Really do appreciate it. And Steph, anything important coming up here this weekend?
Yeah, just what I mentioned a little bit earlier. I think I did mention it.
Yeah.
Since we started recording.
Oh, that's right.
The New York City Marathon
Mm-hmm.
this weekend. And hopefully I'll have a chance to get to meet up with a couple of listeners, potentially Tanya and Dave Abbey, and maybe even Radio Roger.
Me.
Oh, cool.
And Nick.
Me.
But Nick's on Monday
Yeah.
after the fact.
I think he's had too many beers already.
And I've already lost track of the fact that we've already heard from Catching Up with Steph, and I'm so confused now.
That's okay.
we've
I
been
didn't
doing this
mention any
for
of that other
several
stuff.
hours.
So yeah, I'm going to do my best to make all that work out.
Okay.
I have family and other things going on that include travel plans. So we're trying to coordinate things at the moment. So if there are any other firm plans, I will let everyone know as best I know. But right now I don't know. So that's what I know.
Wow, I'm confused.
But if you're in the New York area and you are planning on cheering on folks in the marathon, you can download the free app from the New York City Marathon, the TCS New York City Marathon, and you can type my name into it, and it should give you a map that shows my position along the course in real time, so you will know where I am.
What would they type in? Stephanie
Plummer.
Plummer.
Yep.
Very good.
So if we type in Dr. Steph.
If you type in Dr. Steph, I don't think it's going to come up with my actual information.
Oh, okay.
Steph, how was your dad's cruise, by the way? I forgot to ask you.
Oh yeah, very nice. Yeah, he had a lot of great things to say. He went to Cuba for a day on a cruise. So they got some advice from Dana, who had recently been there as well. So thank you very much for doing that. That was very helpful for him.
Excellent.
Let's see, I'm on a 4-day trip. On day 2 in Birmingham, Alabama, yesterday in Pensacola, and tomorrow in Madison, Wisconsin, where I'll be meeting up with Chris Ott and anybody else that happens to be in the Madison, Wisconsin area. We're going to meet up for a lunch somewhere. We haven't specified a location yet. But if you're listening to this live, so it's very, very small audience right now. If you happen to hear me speaking about it, make sure that you look and see where we're going to be on Slack, and or just go to downtown Madison and just start screaming APG, and we'll probably hear you.
That'll definitely work. It's a small town, right?
Yeah.
It's a great small town.
It is. It's a wonderful city. I'm looking forward to it. So, anyway, that's what I have planned, and nothing really exciting happening in my life since we've last recorded. So that's about it. Watched the F1 race on Sunday, and watched Hamilton become the world champion driver. And
an interesting race too.
Yeah, it was.
That's the same Hamilton that Steph was watching, yeah?
I think so. Oh wait. Alexander Hamilton from like the late 1700s to early 1800s.
That's him. Yeah, he drives a Mercedes.
One of the founding fathers of the United States of America, first Secretary of the Treasury. Definitely same guy.
Yeah, no, not the same guy. Oh well.
Killed in a duel by Aaron Burr. No, not the same guy.
Really?
No, because I think
for some reason strangely decided to go back to the UK to drive cars.
Yes.
Yeah, the Formula One guy, I think he's still alive. So
okay. Definitely not the same guy then.
Still a great race that Hamilton had in the theater.
It's still going even.
Let's do this. Let's knock out our coffee fund cadre acknowledgement, and then we'll start with a little issue that we talked about a couple of episodes ago that we want to kind of cover again because we have some new information regarding that. So let me hit this button right here.
Johnny, how much more coffee? No thanks.
I love coffee. I love tea.
I love the APG community.
Coffee and tea and the Java and me. A cup, a cup, a cup, a cup, a cup. All right, the Coffee Fund, the Java Jive, sung by Jeff Smith. That is the way that you can become involved in our show financially. So if you have the financial resources to do this, please check out the Coffee Fund and become part of our Coffee Fund cadre. And you can find out information about it on airlinepilotguide.com/coffee. Since the last show, we have a new Classic Fund contributor, and his name is, and I'm going to do my best to pronounce this, Vigner Örn Winneson. I'm not sure what country Vigner is from, but thank you, sir, for signing up for the Coffee Fund Classic method, a recurring donator. We do appreciate that. And another way to do it is become a patron via patreon.com. And since the last episode, we have a new producer, Dan Keene. Welcome, Dan, and thank you for becoming a patron of our show. Again, if you want to learn more about how you can become involved in the Coffee Fund cadre, head over to airlinepilotguy.com/coffee. No, we don't want to do that. We're not going to do the news. Forget that part. Post. Now, as I mentioned, before we did the Coffee Fund, we talked about something, I believe Alex sent us some audio feedback on episode 345, and he posed a question regarding a situation that he encountered in a Northwest Alabama airport, a small Class E non-towered airport at night. And you know what? I think that this piece of audio feedback is going to recap this nicely. And this is from our good friend, Jim Howard. And let's hear from Jim.
Hello, APG crew and community. This is Jim Howard, and I have a comment on APG 345 concerning Alex's question about proper traffic pattern behavior at uncontrolled airports. First, let's review Alex's question.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Alex from Northwest Alabama. I was doing some PPL training last night, returning to my home field after a night cross-country flight with my instructor. Now, this is a very small Class E airport, and a small regional airline operates out of this airport. And as I was making my calls as I was returning at about 10 miles out, I noticed one of the pilots from this airline was calling out a right base and then a right final for a certain runway when all of the traffic for all of the runways at this airport is always left traffic.
I felt like the panelists' discussion after his question wandered slightly off the beaten path for this common issue. The answer is that if you're in a Class G or E uncontrolled airport and one pilot is flying a right traffic and the other is flying a left traffic, one of the pilots is violating FAR 91.126 paragraph B, direction of turns. Basically what that says is you can make only left turns in a traffic pattern unless the airport has a designated right traffic pattern, which is indicated by the letters Romeo Papa on a VFR chart, or you can look in what's formerly known as the Airport Facilities Directory and now known as the chart supplement for that airport. That will have the correct pattern information. The other thing that was said that is absolutely incorrect was that a straight-in airplane has priority over all other traffic. That is completely wrong. I won't go down the rabbit hole of right-of-way rules, but I suggest you read those. But do not think that if you're on a straight-in, everyone has to get out of your way, because that is not true. I would also encourage, particularly student pilots or pilots reviewing for a flight review, or just because they want the latest information on operating at uncontrolled airports, that they review FAA Advisory Circular 90-66B. 9066B was added fairly recently because the information in the Airman's Information Manual and the FARs themselves really don't cover everything that happens in the real world. So this advisory circular is really, really great for telling you how to enter traffic patterns and how to behave in a traffic pattern. So I hope that helps a little bit. And I know I'm merely a navigator at heart, and I hate to contradict a real professional pilot, but in this case, I really feel like just turn left in the traffic pattern, unless it's an RP, right pattern, then turn right in the traffic pattern, and you'll be just fine. Let me also mention that if you're approaching a straight-in approach to an uncontrolled airport, that's fine, but right-of-way rules still apply. You can't just barge in front of somebody turning base to final, for example. I really appreciate all the hard work that goes into APG by the crew, and I want to thank you guys for that. This is Jim Howard in Texas.
Oh, sure. Compliment us at the very end of all that. Thanks, Jim.
That was cruel, but fair.
No, really, Jim. Thank you for for that audio feedback. Now, I received this and I read the couple of the links that he sent, and I'm thinking, but I still, in my head, I'm thinking, this is not cut and dry, in my opinion. And I think that there's more to this. And I'm thinking, why didn't I ask a couple, 3 people that we all know very well who also do aviation podcasts? One, our good friend Brandon Gonzalez. He does podcasting on a plane. He is both a licensed pilot and also an air traffic controller. And we know a couple of folks that do the show Opposing Bases, Air Traffic Talk, RH and AG. And again, both of them, pilots and air traffic controllers. And I'm thinking, maybe I should have asked them to begin with to help us answer this question. So I posed the question to them and said, what do you think? Did we go wrong here? And if so, how? And maybe you can shed some light on this whole thing. So let's start with the feedback that we got from Brandon. Again, podcasting on a plane. And here we go. Take it away, Brandon.
Hey, Captain Jeff and the crew and the APG community. This is Brandon here, podcasting on a plane. And I wanted to have a little audio feedback here in reference to Alex's question, the one about the traffic pattern with the regional plane inbound from episode 345. And without, recreating the whole event and without ATC to go by, this is obviously just opinion and conjecture. But it's a really good question that he asked. And to even give an opinion on it, I have to wear my CFI hat and my turbine pilot hat and my ATC hat all at the same time. When I heard the situation in the audio feedback and then the added extra information that Captain Jeff provided in our email side conversation, my first gut reaction is that this is just an airliner boiling down their visual approach to simple pattern-like calls on a CTF. And there's a chance that he was getting vectored for an ILS too. We don't really know. But as I'm about to discuss, it probably wouldn't really matter anyway. But that's all. So anyway, I did some digging, and it looks like there are 3 straight-in approaches to runway 29 at Muscle Shoals. So vectors to a straight-in final is a reasonable scenario to examine, as is a visual approach. Either way, though, a jet making a visual approach from the northwest is more or less going to be flying an effective right pattern for runway 29. But that's it. They aren't pattern traffic, and at this point, they probably are going the extra mile in making these calls at all if they're getting vectored for an ILS. I mean, technically, all they really need to do is make a call when they join the final that they're on frequency and making a straight in, and that's pretty much that. We don't really know in this story how far out they are from the airport, but assuming they're getting vectored to the ILS, let's call it maybe 4 or 5 miles wide downwind and maybe 2,000 to 4,000 feet AGL. Had they not been making traffic calls, you never would have known that they were there in the first place. You would have just heard their initial call that they were on the ILS, right? So if the pilots were receiving vectors on the approach frequency and then also going above and beyond to make CTAF calls at the same time, I'd say that no, what they were doing was not at all dangerous or contrary to any regulation, but instead is actually a commendable effort to communicate their presence and their intentions to an airport that's full of airplanes that are probably a bunch slower. But as for the visual approach scenario, which is probably the more likely of the two, I want to start by saying that while there are exceptions to many rules, there aren't any scheduled air carriers that I know of that are allowed to just cancel IFR and proceed VFR to a non-towered airport at night. And now that Alex is finishing up his private training and getting into the instrument stuff, he's about to learn a whole new perspective on this stuff. And as he's going to soon find out, the visual approach is often a misunderstood procedure. So let me explain. If the aircraft in question is on a legitimate visual approach, we can presume that they've already been cleared for a visual by the radar controller before they even checked in on the CTAF in the first place. And assuming that they're on a visual, they're still an IFR aircraft though, just on a visual approach. And because they're in VMC, they can save a little time and money. But don't ever confuse that with a VFR aircraft in the pattern at the airport, or even just a run-of-the-mill VFR arrival of any kind. They're still an IFR airplane on a type of approach. It's just one where you can't touch a cloud, and there isn't a published missed approach segment in case you don't see the runway. But that doesn't matter because you had to see it before you were cleared for the approach. But whatever, I digress. In my opinion, an IFR air carrier aircraft on a visual approach would not be subject to flying the entire suggested local VFR traffic pattern. I mean, could you imagine what it would be like if they were? Anyway, all of the VFR pattern legs and suggested entries, recommended radio calls, etc. at non-towered airports are so that there's an organized flow around the airfield and so that everybody's doing predictable stuff in a predictable way so that pilots can separate themselves since there's no tower to do it for them. And never forget that there can always be someone there not equipped with or using a radio at all. And unfortunately, well, that's perfectly legal. So to Captain Jeff's funny comment about the America airports being kind of like cowboy country, that's kind of how it feels sometimes at non-towered airports. And believe me, I know. I've flown both visuals and straight-in instrument procedures to non-towered airports in the Meridian turboprop that I fly in just the last couple weeks. And believe me, I was on high alert each time for sure. But the guys in the air carrier aircraft, they're not the ones making it that way at all. And from what I can figure out from the information given, it seems like, if anything, they were actually going well above and beyond for safety. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. But I love the lively discussion you guys had on it. There was a ton of good stuff in there. And I may actually have some more future feedback for Nick and Dana too. But I really appreciate you guys for asking me to weigh in on the issue. It's always an honor to participate in the show in any way I can. Thanks, guys. Good day.
Thanks, Brandon, for the feedback, the audio feedback. Also, and we actually have all these guys in the chat room with us right now. It's a very lively discussion.
This is great. I'm really loving this.
Yeah.
So I think you can actually go back and watch the video and see the chats as they, or the comments as they happen. So if you're at all interested in that, it's good stuff.
You can always do that because I always put a link to the YouTube video, which is the raw version of all this. And usually most of what we have in the audio only version is what we have in the video, but sometimes we have a little bit extra for you. But it's always a fun thing to go and look at the video and see what's happening in the chat room. And so RH, one of the hosts of the Opposing Bases Aviation Talk podcast. I hope I got that right. Air Talk.
Opposing Bases.
Opposing Bases.
What's their? I forget.
Air Talk. Another shoot. Oh, here it is. Air Traffic Talk. There we go.
There you go.
That's opposingbases.com. RH got back to me right away with text feedback. And he went, and basically, it's astonishing to me that basically what RH said is exactly what we just heard from Brandon. I mean, almost exactly the same. And then RH also added, he said that he went out for a run and listened to it again and started thinking about it a little bit more. He quoted from, I'm not sure what manual this is from. He'll tell me because he's in the chat room right now. Landing aircraft while in final approach to land or while landing have the right of way. Okay, he's talking about the issue about right of way. Aircraft while in final approach to land or while landing have the right of way over another aircraft or flight operating on the surface, except that they shall not take advantage of this rule to force an aircraft off the runway surface which has already landed and is attempting to make way for an aircraft on final approach. When two or more aircraft are approaching an airport for the purpose of landing, the aircraft at the lower altitude has the right of way, but it shall not take advantage of this rule to cut in front of another which is on final approach to land or to overtake that aircraft. The right of way is not black and white. The jet could have been, because now he's talking about our situation, the jet could have been at the same altitude as the prop in left traffic. Who goes first? The pilots should be communicating this on frequency to avoid the development of a dangerous situation. So communication is definitely important. And the RH continues, also, I want to emphasize that even though the crew was announcing their position using downwind, base, final phraseology, I think their wide approach should be considered a setup for a straight in, not necessarily a right traffic pattern. And again, this, as you can see, all of this is kind of grayish stuff. It's not black and white. Let's see, he continues, the jet arrival may have arrived on final at the same point in space that they had taken vectors for the ILS. So the type of approach is irrelevant, in my opinion. When ATC sent the jet to advisories, the crew was responsible for their own traffic avoidance, and the use of CTF should have resolved what Alex describes as a dangerous situation. And then just to throw a little bit more into it before I let everybody else put in their 2 cents, I would like to, well, we do have some more audio feedback from Nick in Wichita. But before we hear from Nick, the Acme Airlines has some guidance for us, and Dana and I do, on occasion, end up in a situation where we fly into places that may have a tower that's not operating because perhaps we are flying a very late flight into an airport and the tower is closed at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, and perhaps we're running late and we're getting in after that time. Also, for me, most of the time I encounter a no tower or non-tower operation is the first flight of the day before the tower is open. But generally it works out that by the time we're ready for takeoff, the tower's open and we get clearance for takeoff, in those situations from tower. But the times that we do end up going into places such as Augusta, Georgia, that I'm thinking of right off the top of my head, and let's see, Panama City, KECP. There are times that we end up flying approaches at night into non-towered operations. And we do have specific guidance at Acme Airlines regarding what we should do and considerations. Now, again, this is in our operation specifications, our op specs, and most of this is not regulatory in nature. It's just like we really strongly advise that you do this. And one of the things they talk about is that if you're coming into an airport and it's VMC, visual meteorological conditions, and there is a possibility that there might be some VFR traffic there, you may consider entering a standard traffic pattern entry. And it says often proves to be safer to plan and execute than a straight-in pattern entry. But of course, if we are flying, we're under radar control, we are cleared for a visual approach, we can do that from whichever way we're approaching the airport. And the visual approach, don't confuse that with VFR operations and a VFR pattern. I think that Brandon and RH made that clear. Those are two separate things. And a visual approach, even though you're navigating visually to the airport, doesn't mean that you're on a VFR approach. You're on actually an IFR approach. It's sort of like an instrument approach, but you're on an IFR flight plan, I guess I should say more properly. So we do have some guidance regarding that. The other thing I wanted to make a point about, because I've really been thinking about this a lot the last few days, is that if we go into an airport, Dana, you go into Northwest Arkansas Regional Airport, they have parallel runways, and it's at night. The tower is closed because they don't have a 24/7 operation. What is the traffic pattern? What is it, a left traffic pattern or a right traffic pattern? How do we know that?
Oh, well, on our publications and information, we actually don't have that information.
No, we don't.
And, it's 1,500 feet is above field elevation.
I'm not talking about the altitude.
The
I'm talking
airport
about
facilities directory?
No, we don't have that. They
Well,
don't give that. We don't have that information.
You don't have that information at all. That's available to all pilots all the time.
That's not part of our publications in our kit.
Segmented circle.
You don't have a sectional either?
No. Well, we do have on our EFB, we have a sectional, but again, so I'm just using that as an example. I know that the standard is left-hand traffic.
Standard is left-hand, but there are exceptions where it is right-hand.
To it. And
if it's right pattern, it's noted on the sectional.
I've never, but I know, but sectionals are not something that, because we're operating IFR, and it's a very rare thing that we come into a place and we cancel IFR and we enter a VFR pattern. And
but honestly, Jeff, with our current technology that we have, we do have the ability to pull up VFR charts.
I know, and I've looked at those in the last 2 days, and I'm saying I have not found any. Maybe I just haven't found one yet that says anything about a right-hand pattern in anything that I've been able to find.
You have to look at the airport symbol on the VFR chart.
No, there's actually below it. It'll say RP and the runway number that's designated right traffic.
Okay. Well, you can see this is something that we very rarely ever have to
field is
think about.
Pops to mind if you want to look at one. It's Fox Delta Kilo, but they have one on the chart.
Okay. So anyway, my point is that you hear from the air traffic controllers who are also pilots how they thought what this regional carrier did going into Muscle Shoals that night was not dangerous, and it was not uncommon, and it was not unsafe. Again, I think the problem is that we're operating in completely different environments. And most of the time, we're going to operate under IFR until we land, and then we're going to cancel once we're on the ground, either through flight service or an ATC frequency, or even by telephone.
So can I throw one more unusual situation into the mix? And this is just to put it out there. I'm not saying what anyone would do, but just something to think about, because it is something that is, as far as I know, legal and potentially dangerous, but probably not encountered very often. If you are at a Class G airport or flying into a Class G airport, particularly on an instrument approach, which can be done, non-precision approaches, and you arrive in the vicinity of the airport, it is entirely possible that you can encounter VFR traffic, because the cloud requirement or the cloud clearance requirements there are different. So you could have someone who is basically just flying around in 1 mile visibility at their Class G airport in the pattern, and you can break out of the clouds with that 1 mile visibility and be confronted with traffic in the pattern there. So just be aware of that if you're ever in that unlikely situation. So.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, maybe the smaller carriers are more the regional.
Unlikely to be a air carrier that's doing that at a Class G airport, but I'm just saying for all the other instrument pilots out there, just a scenario to potentially be aware of.
Yeah.
So definitely make sure you're on the CTF you're talking, and have as good of situational awareness as you can possibly get.
And then Brandon made the point that that they were going above and beyond to make self-announced position reports on the CTF, and at Acme Airlines, that's not above and beyond. That's what they expect us to do. So if we're operating to an airport that doesn't have an operating tower, we are required by our own company policy to definitely monitor the CTF frequency, 4 or 5 minutes out, 35 miles or more out, and also to make reports just as if we were, flying a VFR pattern.
To be totally honest, we run into problems like this at my home field, even without being a Class G airport, because we're right next to the SFRA. So traffic coming out from that pattern, it's usually not air carrier, but traffic coming out will often get handed to the tower, even when the tower's operating 2 miles from the runway. So they'll be coming onto the frequency when they're turning on to short final relatively, and they're coming onto the tower frequency, and nobody else knew they were coming.
Yeah, you just have to make, that's the essential key ingredient to all of this, is just to communicate and to let everybody know where you are, what your intention is, and if there is a potential conflict, that you work that out with whatever the conflict could possibly be there.
Exactly.
And just understand that if you're a VFR operator and a air carrier comes into your airport, they are probably not likely to enter your VFR pattern and get sequenced behind you and all that kind of stuff. They're probably going to fly a straight-in approach or something that looks sort of like a straight-in approach to the runway, because that's just the way we do things in our world.
Which I find interesting, Jeff, because one of the things talked about there is the aircraft that's lower has the right of way, and not to obviously abuse the situation, but more than likely a straight-in approach, especially if you're shooting an ILS or an instrument approach, generally speaking, you're going to be on the lower altitude further out than you would be in the traffic pattern. So what I said the other day on the last show, generally speaking, the aircraft on final is going to have the right of way because it's generally going to be lower. But there's no hard written rule. That's correct. I would absolutely agree with that. If a guy is 20 miles out on final approach and makes a call, or even 10 miles out and says, I'm on final approach, well, obviously there's no conflict there. It's when the aircraft is close into the airport, the guy that's on final is going to have the right of way, because they're generally going to be at a lower altitude, and we're talking the air carrier. So
yeah, but let's make sure that that everybody understands it's specifically the one that's at the lower altitude.
Lower altitude, that's correct.
Let's don't throw in the straight in and final approach thing.
But I feel like you hit on something important there, Jeff, which is that it's a training thing to some degree. The air carriers are not likely to be comfortable and familiar to the same degree with the traffic pattern operations, and similarly, the VFR, I mean, I think my VFR training was probably better than average, but that wasn't something that we were specifically had pointed out to us. It wasn't something we had addressed specifically, that, you know, someone coming in IFR isn't necessarily on the frequency until too late. I learned it, you know, de facto kind of when it happened, but it wasn't something that we were made aware of. And that's at a field where it happens a lot. So I think that's probably a hole in basic training for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, you know, I came from a background where I had very little exposure to VFR flying, just a handful of hours before I was trained by the U.S. military. And our world is all IFR. And then I've been with an air carrier for almost 30 years. And again, 99.9% of the time we're operating under instrument flight rules. And so this particular environment that we're talking about here, whoops, I hit my knife shade, is just something that we don't really know. Some of us don't know a heck of a lot about. We're not used to this environment at all. Now, Dana knows more about it because he kind of grew up in that world.
That's true.
Finally, Nick from Wichita, just so we're going to flog the dead horse here. So another piece of audio feedback regarding this whole thing.
Hi, Captain Jeff and the rest of the APG crew. This is Nick from Wichita, and I thought I'd send in a brief little tidbit of feedback regarding Alex's question in episode 345. He was asking about uncontrolled airport traffic pattern usage, basically. And a while back, maybe 6 months ago or so, I sent in some feedback that was a little longer and a little wordier. That was based on Advisory Circular 90.66b. That gives all of the things you should do if you're operating in and out of uncontrolled airports, but things that are not regulatory. Just one interesting thing I wanted to note, and I don't think anybody mentioned it in the episode when they were responding to Alex, is that almost everything regarding uncontrolled airspace operation is advisory, not regulatory. So when you talk about how you enter a pattern, if you're using a radio, stuff like that, the FAA says this is what you should do, but you don't have to do it. That's why you're allowed to enter the traffic pattern on a 45 or cross over the midfield or even do a straight-in approach if you like. However, the one thing, interestingly, which I think Alex was actually asking about specifically, the one thing that is regulatory in nature is the direction of the traffic pattern. So FAR Part 91, 126, and 127 kind of covers this for Class E and G if you want to look it up. But basically what it says is Part 91.126, which covers Class G airspace, says, you know, if you're operating in the vicinity of a Class G airspace, all turns must be made to the left unless airport displays light signs or visual markings indicating turns should be made to the right, which is like a segmented circle or something on the ground. I've never actually used that. However, it is that is something that's published on charts, VFR charts and AFDs and stuff like that, if an airport is right traffic. So in the United States, any airport that you go to, you assume it's left traffic. And if it's right traffic, it's published on the chart. They do that for noise abatement. If you know, there's a noise sensitive area on one side of the airport, they do that if two airports are close together. They'll put the traffic patterns going in opposite directions to give them more separation. But that is one thing that's interesting. And if you go on to the next part, 91.127, which is Class E airspace, which is actually what Alex was flying in, it basically says, you know, unless otherwise required by Part 93 of this chapter, each person operating in the vicinity of Class E airspace must comply with the requirements of 91.126. So it does say unless otherwise authorized or required by ATC facility. However, I find it highly unlikely that even a jet on a instrument approach under the control of a center or some sort of ATC facility would get cleared to fly a right-hand pattern at an airport where everybody's expecting left-hand traffic, because all of the traffic operating their VFR has no requirement and really not even any expectation to be listening to the ATC facilities and expecting that opposite direction traffic, which obviously if you're using the common traffic advisory frequency, not a big deal, but like Dana mentioned, radios aren't required. So you could have a person out there flying the appropriate left-hand pattern without a radio and not being aware of that jet coming in the right-hand traffic. So I just thought I'd toss that in there and mention briefly at the end, this is more of a question, follow-up question to Captain Nick and his, I don't know, his ideology on visual approaches, I guess. I'm a VFR pilot working on my instrument rating. So I don't know all the intricacies of positive control on an approach, if you're a visual flight, if you're a visual approach versus all the different types of instrument approaches. But I did think that the controllers are responsible for separation, and I guess the reason I can't actually point to a rule or anything for that, but I guess the reason that I always thought that was, whenever I'm flying around VFR and I enter controlled airspace, they'll tell me, they'll point out or mention any aircraft near me or any aircraft that I'm supposed to follow, and once I respond with a positive affirmation that I've seen, I have the airplane in sight, or I've seen the airplane that they're referring to, oftentimes they'll come back to me and they'll say, follow, the 172 ahead of you, maintain visual separation, number 2 to landing or whatever. And my experience or my understanding, I guess, was just that as I fly into that controlled airspace, I'm expecting the controller. Obviously, I'm looking around, still maintaining visual flight rules, so I'm seeing and avoiding. But at the same time, I still have some feeling of, or some expectation of, the controller controlling that airspace, providing me separation, some level of separation, maybe until I am pointed out another aircraft and verify that I've seen him. And at that point, they tell me to maintain visual separation. And to me, that seems like at that point, the onus is shifted from the controller onto myself. So I guess mostly for Dana and Steph, since they're probably have a little more VFR experience than the other two. But Jeff and Nick too, I'd be curious if your feeling on that, if that's actually the case, or if I'm kind of misunderstood in what I'm thinking there. So thanks for the great show, and hope to hear from you guys soon.
Thank you, Nick. And speaking of that point, the last point that you made regarding visual approaches, and I think this is something that, Nick, you may not be aware of, and I may not have been aware of it either until doing some research regarding this whole situation and visual approaches and such. In the Airman's Information Manual, AIM, it talks about visual approaches. Again, these are conducted on IFR flight plans and authorize a pilot to proceed visually and clear of clouds to the airport. And there's paragraph 5-4-23, letter D, separation responsibilities. If the pilot has the airport in sight but cannot see the aircraft to be followed, ATC may clear the aircraft for a visual approach. However, ATC retains both separation and wake vortex separation responsibility. When visually following a preceding aircraft, acceptance of the visual approach clearance constitutes acceptance of pilot responsibility for maintaining a safe approach interval and adequate wake turbulence separation. So Dana and I hear this a lot when we're flying into airports such as Atlanta, etc. The controller will say, do you have, traffic is 2 o'clock, it's a 757, blah, blah, blah. Do you have the traffic or the airport in sight? Now, if you say, I usually say I have both, or both of them. But if you say that you have the preceding aircraft in sight, then separation and wake turbulence avoidance is on you. And I know that's something that Nick does not like. But if you say you have the airport in sight, but you do not acknowledge that you have the preceding aircraft in sight, air traffic control still has the responsibility to keep you separated and give you wake turbulence separation as well. So I didn't know if you knew that little wrinkle in the whole way visual approaches are.
No, I didn't, Jeff. And I must admit, the complexity of the discussion tonight has left me both bemused and slightly concerned, because the intricacies of the difficulties of flying in this kind of mixed environment has me as a foreigner coming to this country only occasionally and only would be very rarely mixing in this traffic. The fact that you guys can't really come to a clear conclusion as to what's right and what's wrong makes me, as a visitor to the country, flying a 300-ton airplane, going, well, I'm trying to pole around this country, and you guys seem to be a little bit in doubt as to what's going on. What kind of chance does that leave me to know where the priorities are? Because it's not simple, is it? It doesn't seem to be straightforward.
Yeah, but Nick, when you say you're coming into this country, of all the airports you fly into, every single one of them is Class Bravo.
Well, yeah, some of our diversions may not be.
All right,
and what's more, if I have a
at least.
problem and I have to go into now, admittedly, if I've got a problem, I'll probably declare an emergency and I'll have priority over everyone. I would hope everyone would acknowledge that, but I might well end up on a diversion or perhaps asked on a charter to go into an airfield that's not. So you're right. The great majority of the time, I'm flying into an airfield of an equivalent stature to the one that I would normally operate in the rest of the world. But every now and again, I don't want to fall foul just on the one occasion when I end up at an airfield where I'm ending up mixing with visual traffic and really have no clear understanding, because there is no clearly defined set of rules as to who has priority.
And you're right. It is a lot of gray area for sure. And I think that a lot of this is based upon, the fact that everybody out there should be responsible for making sure they're conducting their flights safely. And in all these cases, it's a visual environment where see and avoid is paramount. And it's not always perfect, but it works out pretty well most of the time.
Yeah, and that's part of the whole conversation, Jeff. It really comes down to, if you're in a visual airport, you have to have some responsibility, and that is that we are all trained to a certain level that the FAA requires for us to be certified as pilots. So thus, we're very well aware of the circumstances when we fly visual approaches, whether it be a commercial carrier or if you're in a traffic pattern flying VFR rules. You are mixing apples with oranges here. IFR rules, VFR rules, and Robert alluded to it earlier. I mean, listen, as a primary student, you're not being taught what instrument rules are, what instrument flight conditions are like, what an instrument approach is. It's pretty much Chinese to a lot of people that are flying as a VFR aircraft in a traffic pattern. So they don't know when somebody's doing an approach of, whether it be an ILS or VOR or an NDB or whatever else it is, or these days a GPS approach. So the moral of the story is exactly what you just said. It comes down to being prudent as pilots, as we're trained, and that is, I think the FAA leaves a gray area here, because the simple fact is that it is up for interpretation. It's up for the fact that we all communicate. And let's face it, how many we almost never talk about this because it doesn't happen very often. That is, there are very few collisions with VFR aircraft in the sky, because it does happen. It has happened, but it is not a very common occurrence, because what's the first thing a flight instructor teaches you, Robert? They teach you to do clearing turn. Always clearing, always looking, always scanning. You don't spend time inside the airplane and the instruments. I think was it 3 to 1? It's 3 seconds out, 1 second in, or something similar to that. And that's going back, a few years on that. But the moral of the story is you're outside the aircraft, scanning all the time under visual rules. So we cannot confuse what a visual approach is, because that, as Jeff has said, it is an instrument approach versus a VFR aircraft flying in a pattern. So that pretty much puts an end to that, I think.
Now, when we were talking about earlier, Dana, you said and again, this is something that has been bothering me the last day or two when I've been doing all this research, is that, and I think Mark Lebrowski in the chat room said, I assumed that KCEU in Clemson was a left-hand pattern when I flew there last week. Good thing I was listening to the CTF from way out and realized it's a right-hand pattern. I won't make that mistake again. So while you all were talking, I looked in my Jeppesen Flight Deck Pro app, and under the VFR section, which is supposed to be a sectional, right? I mean, that's the only sectional we have available to us, right, Dana?
That's correct.
Okay, so I looked up KCEU, and I'm looking at it right now on my EFB, and I see, and I've blown it all the way up. I've zoomed right on in, and I've clicked on the Clemson, South Carolina, Oconee County Regional Airport, K Charlie Echo Uniform, and I don't see anything here, anywhere that talks about the traffic pattern. It says the lat long, it says the elevation, it says +5 UTC, daylight savings observed. Runways, I'll click on that. Runways, it tells me it's a 5,000 by 100 foot runway, asphalt. Nothing about the pattern.
Jeff, because it's a very simple answer. If it's a normal pattern, traffic pattern, it's going to be a left-hand pattern. It's
But
not going to be.
but Mark said it's a right-hand traffic pattern, though. Mark,
It's a right-hand traffic pattern on runway 7. So if you look at the sectional, I'm not looking at the AFD or now the chart supplement. I'm looking at the sectional. But if you look at the sectional, normally most airports have 3 lines on the sectional. They have the name and the three-letter abbreviation. Then they have the ASOS or the ATIS or whatever the information channel is. Then they have their elevation and their lighting and that line with the CTAF or tower frequency. And then the 4th line, if it exists, is going to say RP and 1 or more numbers of a runway. In this case, it does. It says Oconee County Regional, CEO. I won't read out the frequencies and everything, but it says RP7. And you're saying you don't have that on your chart?
None of that.
So, okay. So then they've removed part of the data that's actually on the VFR sectional from what you're looking at there.
Yeah,
Right.
it's pretty clearly on my chart.
So that's what I'm saying. I'm going into a place. Whoop! Again, I hit the lampshade. Sorry. I'm going into a place at night, and it's after tower is closed. I wasn't planning on getting there that late, but how do I know what if it is a non-standard pattern?
Yeah, I guess I'm just really surprised that you don't have the chart supplement that they're calling it now?
No.
Well, it's a section. I mean, I'm looking at the.
I know it's a
sectional
sectional, but I mean,
yeah.
if you're perhaps it doesn't make sense for them to have all of that information. But I would think that the chart supplement would be important anyway to have.
I would agree. I mean, this is going to be an unpopular statement in that it's been unpopular before, but this falls into the category kind of, to me, to some degree of the NOTAM problem. There's so much information that the pilots are responsible for knowing. You're responsible for knowing what's on the VFR sectional, even if it's not being given to you. But how can you possibly know everything for every flight you take? It's hard enough for Steph or I doing a hour-and-a-half flight at 100 knots, let alone something that like you guys are flying.
Right. Now, granted that the situation that we're going to encounter, an airport that is very small, non-tower, and it's going to have a non-standard traffic pattern, and the fact that we would even consider joining the VFR pattern at all to begin with is very, very remote. But I'm still saying that it's a possibility, and I would like to know this information. I don't have it available.
Yeah,
I think we're saying
that's taken out of your information.
You don't have that information.
Yeah.
So it would
Well,
be important.
and let's face it, Jeff. The charts that we have, all right, on our iPad here, are not true sectionals.
Right.
They are not
the
in the
Jeppesen
slightest.
charts.
They are not. No, I mean,
No, they're not actual sectionals.
They are not actual VFR
But
sectionals
looking over Dana's shoulder
we
here, it
don't
looks a lot
as-
like a
as-
modified Garmin chart, but it's not anywhere near everything.
It's basically a VFR map. Is really what it is. It just gives you basic information where the lakes are, where the roadways are, where the towns are, where an airport happens to be. So it's not a true VFR chart as much as it's just VFR information. We're not actually, per our SOPs, unless we're 35 miles within inside of an airport visually, we can't operate VFR. Period.
Well, we cannot accept a visual approach unless we're 35 nautical miles
Right.
from the airport. But that's not. We're not talking about visual approaches. That's an IFR clearance.
Correct. But we as an airline cannot operate VFR.
No, if you look at the procedures that we have, it says consideration must be made as to it would be safer to enter the VFR pattern. And, in other words, that to me, that implies canceling IFR when you're right in the ATA.
Within 35 miles of the airport. That's correct.
But again, the 35 miles, though, it really, that's to do with the visual approach. It doesn't say anything about operating VFR. That's visual approach, which is an IFR procedure.
We don't have the technology. Well, we do have technology, but we don't have the charts to be able to fly VFR. That's what I'm saying. Is we can file and fly IFR all day long because we have all the appropriate charts, procedures, but we do not have the appropriate charts and information to be actually able to fly around VFR. We can do visuals and we can fly a pattern. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you that, I'm looking at the Coney Regional CE Charlie Echo uniform, and it does say RP7, which would be indicative of the fact that it's a right-hand pattern for runway 7. But I'm looking at the same thing you're looking at on my iPad, and it gives me no information whatsoever. So if I look at this as a captain and I look at this, all right, well, I don't have the information to be able to fly that airport plane at that airport and be able to fly a VFR, because under VFR flight rules, not a visual approach, that's different. I don't have the ability to legally do that. That's what I'm saying.
I really wonder if the sectional is in that somewhere, but buried in a hidden layer or something. It's not.
This is it. This is all we have.
Now, we used to, when our flight weather viewer, which was a non-regulatory app, it was a proprietary thing that we had. The earliest version of it, actually, there was a way for us to see the sectionals. But again, it was just kind of a gee whiz, if it's there if you want to use it, but it wasn't a requirement for us to operate our standard operating procedures.
That's absolutely shocking to me that you don't have access to it in your tools.
No, we don't. And that's what I'm saying is that, to be able to navigate legally as a VFR student, you would have to have a sectional chart or a WAC chart or a terminal chart to be able to navigate, and we don't have that ability.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the limitation is 35 miles within the airport. We can legally enter in a traffic pattern, absolutely, but we can't navigate.
But you can't fly VFR unless you can see the airport and you're in range.
Exactly
that's really interesting.
We know.
Just to be clear on the 35 thing, that only applies to visual approaches, which is
visual approaches. That's
so you have to be visual. You have to be able to see the airport, and so there's a 35-mile maximum. You can't say you see the airport at 60 miles, but if you can see it and you're in 35, you can do it. Exactly. I'm still surprised you can do that without a sectional, but
but that's not. So we're still talking visual approaches there, which is on an instrument flight rules plan, not VFR flying.
It's all confusing because we're using a lot of the same terminology, but we're actually talking apples and oranges.
The whole concept of visual approach is confusing as all get out to anyone who's not an instrument pilot.
So,
as Nick said before, it's a weird kind of in between that we do here.
So here's the deal: Class E, which has an instrument approach, and we're flying to an instrument airport.
Sure,
we can fly to it legally.
Yeah.
Class G, technically, I don't think I could fly to it legally.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering is whether you. It sounds like you probably. I mean, in an emergency, you can break any rule you want because that's how it works. But anything but an emergency, it sounds like you couldn't.
I don't think so.
Not that there are many Class Golf airports out there that would, support a Mad Dog, let alone what he's flying. But
most Class G airports, I think, would be very, very short runs.
3,000 feet or less, unless they're high elevation.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So
okay, well, I think this kind of just illustrates that there are still a lot of areas in this world of aviation that are, make you scratch your head a little bit, and and I guess Alex kind of spurred this whole discussion, and I'm glad you did, Alex, and because I've learned a lot in the last couple of days. Thank you for asking the question. Thank you. Brandon and RH for participating in your your professional opinions about what you think about the situation, and I think that this has been beneficial.
Jim as well for the information about.
From Jim, also he mentioned it's been mentioned several times. The circular 90.66.bravo, and then there are a couple of 91 dot something or other else.
91.125 was the other reference that he was.
Okay. good stuff. And so it's important that we all, as aviators, be as educated and knowledgeable as we can as to as much of this as we can possibly, digest. And the bottom line, of course, though, is just try to run a safe operation as best you can. And communication is so important. Letting everybody know where you are and what your intent is, and if there's a conflict, then work it out.
I'll throw something in here just real quick for you guys to think about that. It just occurred to me, but Part 91 deals with non-commercial operations, so it's not particularly applicable to you guys flying into small airports.
True.
It's actually the regulations for non-commercial small aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Right, because we're Part 121.
Well, if there's something in 121 to override it, then what's in 91 certainly doesn't apply to you.
Yeah, I don't think there is anything in 121 that has anything to do with any of this.
91 does apply to 121.
Does it?
I would imagine so, because we're still operating under the same rules.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, obviously a lot of the rules apply. You guys probably know this better than I do, but as far as I know, Part 91 is small non-commercial operations. So I would think that either it's included specifically or it's excluded specifically, and I don't know which.
We need someone who writes these regulations for the FAA,
right?
To please send in your 2 cents
Send us
and set the record straight once and for all.
And
Exactly.
the reason why I'm saying that is if I'm flying a visual approach, which is an IFR,
sure,
IFR flight plan, which we have established, what I have to do is maintain proper cloud clearance per Part 91.
Okay.
Right.
So, well, that to me that says that your regulations for 121 say that part of 91 applies, though. I don't want to. This has been a long thing. I don't want to drag this down another road to talk about forever. And I'm thinking right now, what I'm going to probably do is call AOPA. There's a lawyer I know there, and ask him, and I'll send you guys feedback afterward and see what he says. But because I'm curious how that actually carries over. But I don't know. It just, as far as I knew, 91 was small non-commercial.
Well, according to RH, Part 91 applies to Part 121 carriers. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think so too. And we can actually fly Part 91.
Actually, we do. When we take an airplane for a maintenance ferry down to Mexico or whatever, that's a Part 91 operation.
So I think it absolutely applies.
Yeah, Part 91, technically, general operating and flight rules.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not
So see how clear all this is?
121 is just stuff that's specifically applicable to commercial
unless
scheduled air carriers, so regional and major airlines.
SOP and our air carrier certificate and what we're certified for would override anything.
Well, right. I was going to say, I suspect anything that's 121 overrides 91, but if there isn't something, then 91 applies. That's what it sounds like.
I'm so confused. Okay.
Clear as mud. Yes.
Yeah, it is. But you know what? I really enjoyed this discussion.
It was a good,
into the minutia, I know Nick's probably asleep over there, but oh well.
He is.
Yeah, we'll wake him up. Hey, thanks again, everybody, for participating in this discussion. And if you're the FAA and you have the final guidance, please contact us. All right. And with that, it's time now for the news.
Still not on the news.
Damn the 5 on news.
How you doing, Steph? Good?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine, but
for now.
I'm going to struggle in the morning.
Okay. Well, let's just at least cover some of this news, and then we'll call it quits.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. We'll start off with the foremost incident/accident that just occurred, yesterday, I believe. Indonesian Lion Air Flight 610 crashes into the Java Sea with 189 on board. Brand new, pretty much. It was just delivered in August. 737-800 MAX. Registration Papa Kilo Lima, Quebec, Papa. Performing Flight 610 from Jakarta to Pangkai Pinang in Indonesia with 181 passengers and 8 crew was climbing out of Jakarta when the aircraft reached a maximum altitude of about 5,400 feet, then lost height, lost radar contact about 35 nautical miles northeast of Jakarta over the Java Sea. Rescue services are on their way to the suspected crash site. First ships have reached the crash site and located oil slicks as well as debris from the aircraft, including mobile phones and first body parts. Later in the day, 6 bodies were recovered. Authorities state there is no hope for survivors. And this is one of the first reports from the Aviation Herald on Monday. And since then, of course, they've discovered some more bodies and debris. An oil slick was spotted. The site where the airplane went down, the depth of the water is about 30 to 35 meters. Indonesia's Ministry of Transport reported a tugboat saw an aircraft crash into the Java Sea. And on October 30th, which is today, the day we're recording the show, the ministry reported that an unscheduled inspection of Lion Air aircraft has been conducted and indicated there will be sanctions. The nature of the sanctions is being coordinated with the KNKT, which is their National Transportation Safety Committee. A first instruction to inspect all aircraft have already been issued to Lion Air. So looks like they were concerned about this airline operator, this operator, and they did an inspection. It doesn't say exactly what they found, but they obviously found something to be concerned about. So there was a report that the flight prior to this accident flight, the day before, there was an issue with the airplane that required that they fly at an altitude of flight level 280, and there was some kind of an altitude indication error or disagreement, something going on with the pitot-static system, it sounds like to me, or some of the computers involved in this. And apparently the issue was worked on by mechanics, and they said the problem was fixed, and they released the airplane for operations. Our APG community member and good friend and host of Flying and Life podcast, Dispatcher Mike, said that he was looking at some of the data on the Flight Radar 24 site, and he said that it looked like the ADSB was showing irregular altitude deviations and high airspeed. The aircraft leveled off somewhere around 5,000 feet, and according to reports, requested a return to the field, but they did not make a mayday call. Some tweets that I sent suggest that there was a pitot-static issue on the aircraft with some altimeter disagreement between being written up. The previous flight had the same altitude discrepancies and flew to Jakarta at flight level 280. With the research that I did, RVSM airspace in Jakarta is at flight level 280. There are many MELs that can be applied to a 737 that removes it from reduced vertical separation operations. Overall, the wreckage of the aircraft only consists of small pieces. The ADSB data shows the vertical speed could have been around 30,000 feet per minute in the end of a very sad situation. Now, there's also some images being circulated on social media, and many people have cautioned that these may not be accurate, that they may be faked or photoshopped, regarding the actual page from the aircraft logbook, the write-up from the previous flight, the corrective action, etc. So again, people are warning people that this may not be the real deal, that may be a faked document, and I don't understand how anybody could do this. That's just terrible to me. But as far as
I think
something fake like that.
Well, when stuff like this always happens, there's always a rush, I think, anymore to speculate or have information for news media outlets, and I think that's how some of that ends up coming about, which is horrible. Just a quick point of note before you all write in and tell us this. In the article, it says a Boeing 737-800 MAX. It's really, the correct terminology is 737 MAX 8. So before you all write in, it says it in the article, which it's fine. But,
okay.
Just a small point of correction there. That's all.
Okay. 737 MAX 8. There we go.
And I'm just going to add a little word of caution there, because the data that you get on Flight Radar has to come from the aircraft systems. And if there is a fault in the instrumentation on the aircraft, that'll mean that that same fault will be fed across to Flight Radar 24, and any system, any recorder that uses the data may well be getting erroneous data. So it's a bit like, you've got an altimeter problem. It's not very helpful if air traffic go, well, our mode Charlie's showing you at 10,000 feet, because, you've got that information available to you in the aircraft, and that may well be information that is corrupted. Saying that Flight Radar 24 or another system indicates that an aircraft is doing a particular height profile and speed profile may, of course, be just completely erroneous. That's what I'm saying.
All right, very good point. What else is to be said here? It looks like if this was indeed some kind of a pitot-static issue and they were getting erroneous data, airspeed data, speed, altitude data, vertical velocity information, we all should know what pitch attitude and power setting we should set to safely fly the airplane. And if we don't do that, we don't know what that information is, then learn it, because this is I don't know if this is what happened in this situation. Something else could have happened where they maybe couldn't control the airplane for some reason. Maybe some control relied upon data from some of these systems, and it just, there's no way to prevent this from happening. But if it is a situation like Air France 447 and so many others that we've heard about, where if you just go back to the basics, the fundamentals, and you fly the airplane and you set your pitch picture and you set your power setting, you're going to be able to fly the airplane without those instruments. But again, that's just speculation on my part.
You and I, Jeff, we fly an aircraft that is very much a dinosaur, especially compared to what's available nowadays. And you and I are very accustomed to flying the aircraft by hand and being current and flying on a regular basis. I think the technology has come so far with these aircraft that pilots have become more managers than they are pilots. So, thanks, Nick. That's really just.
But even
really?
in the airplane, airplane that we fly, Dana, we have flight directors, and I've seen people. I've flown with several of them that the only thing they see is the flight director bars. They don't see the attitude indicator. They don't see that they're 2.5 degrees nose up or 5 degrees nose up. They see the pitch bar and they see the the other steering bar.
That is a function of and by the way, talking about nose up. Those that are listening to the podcast don't know that Nick just tried to put both his fingers up my nose. So, anyways, the reality is that we've become a slave to the technology, really, and we have to look past that. And right. I'm not sure. It's becoming more and more of an issue. Air France is a perfect example. We can only speculate on what happened here in Jakarta with Lion Air, but there's been a couple other instances where it's becoming an issue. We've got to be able to fly the airplane first and manage the technology. And look at what happened in San Francisco. They just whatever. We don't need to go. We've gone down that road plenty of times. So the moral of the story is that as we get more into technology, I think we're starting to lose the edge on being able to aviate, navigate, and communicate. Aviate is the first thing we need to do. And as a professional pilot, we need to stay up on those skills and know how to fly, as you mentioned, know how to fly at pitch, attitude, and engine setting. Period.
Mm-hmm.
It's basic airmanship. That's
regardless of how fancy the airplane is that you're flying.
Exactly. My instructor always put it: fly the plane, not the autopilot.
Exactly.
The autopilot's a tool, but if you can't fly the plane without it, you certainly shouldn't be flying it with.
Correct.
Exactly.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Amen.
Okay.
I'm just saying those talents aren't restricted to people with old-fashioned airplanes.
No, they're not, and they should not be.
They certainly shouldn't be.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's my whole point. It should be all aircraft, and it's all this new fandangled technology is useless unless you know how to use the basic thing called flying. If you can have all this great technology, and we're just becoming managers. We're no longer pilots. We need to stay current on our piloting skills.
It's okay to be a manager on a flight, but to be a manager, you have to be able to fly without the tech. To be a manager, you have to be a better pilot. It's the opposite of what people tend to think. Oh, the autopilot will do it. I just need to know enough to get off the ground and get the autopilot on. No, you need to know enough to know when the autopilot's screwing up, and that's harder than just flying the airplane.
Correct. And even on our aircraft, which is an older dinosaur, which Jeff was just alluding to, is for a long time all we taught was VNAV.
Sure.
What about click the autopilot off, fly the airplane? What does it do when it's in IAS? What does it do in vertical speed? What protections do I have? How does everything work?
Yeah.
I mean, these are things that we need to be continuously thinking about, and very much like on the Airbus. I mean, you get the Airbus and you have all these laws, right? That direct law, and I don't know all the laws, but
you need to be able to know what it's doing.
Click it all off and fly the airplane. Understand what the airplane's telling you.
Let's just put that one to bed. The laws don't stop you from flying the airplane like an airplane.
Exactly.
They do prevent you from turning it upside down, which I don't think any of us would think would be sensible, or overspeeding it to the point where the wings fall off, or underspeeding it at the point where it stalls.
No, but
that is what the envelope protection does. And apart from that, you can still fly the airplane, even an incredibly advanced airplane, just as basically as you might do a 172.
Sure, you just need to know the laws because you need to know if it changes on you.
Well, you need to know when the protections aren't there.
Exactly.
But if you're not going to take the aircraft to an extreme edge of the envelope where you might need intervention, then you won't need any of the envelope protections.
Fair.
And that's in those protections are there for a very specific reason, Nick. But the Air France deal, right? The laws didn't apply. This one pilot who mishandled his aircraft in a gross manner. He could have been another pilot in another airplane which had none of these things, and he could have done exactly the same thing, and yet you wouldn't then be pointing the finger at a sophisticated aircraft with protections and saying, well, it's a problem because there is over automation in your aircraft. It's not the case at all. It's the fact that that one pilot in that one aircraft that night mishandled his aircraft appallingly, and no one on the flight deck realized what he'd done. So,
I think we're all saying the same thing.
That's exactly my point, Nick.
In agreement. So.
Exactly my point. Is that we have become so dependent upon that technology that we forgot the basic thing, and it's called aviation.
No, I disagree. I think any pilot who'd been perhaps flying any airplane could have mishandled his aircraft if he hadn't been properly trained, or he was a poor pilot. I agree. Don't just say, just because he happened to be sitting on an Airbus, that's the reason he did it. No.
I don't think that's
that's not what I'm saying.
I don't think that's the argument.
You can do it in any airplane.
That's not what I'm Nick, that's not what I'm saying at all.
We're talking about a 737 here in this instance.
We're talking about a 737. It can be any aircraft. What I'm trying to say is the technology has come so far that we've become so dependent on that if we don't actually interact with the airplane as a pilot versus being a flight manager, that we're losing our skills as pilots. That's all I'm saying.
And ultimately, his point is you have to be able to fly the plane without the tech, or with as little of the tech as is reasonable.
And that's what any pilot can. It doesn't matter what airplane you put yourself in. A pilot will be able to fly the airplane regardless of the technology in it.
Well, they should be.
But the great advantage of having an aircraft with sophisticated technology is that by the time you grossly mishandle it, it should step in and prevent you doing it. Now, in the Air France case, that technology wasn't available to him because the flight laws had changed. But the fact is that any other situation, it would have done. It would have stopped them from killing everybody on board.
I agree. 100%.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes. All right. That's all wrapped up. Let's move on to the second item in the folder. Item
it's
B.
on the Airbus problem, by the way.
A small Yeah, I think it doesn't matter whether it's an Airbus or a Boeing or a Mad Dog or whatever. It's the same. It's the same.
Modern
issue.
airplanes all have tech, but the tech is a tool, not a crutch.
Right. Exactly. A small plane, a very low-tech airplane. I would even say maybe even more of a dinosaur than the airplane that Dana and I fly.
Debatable. Just kidding.
Okay. Crashed on the northbound 101 in Agoura Hills on Tuesday. That's in California, Southern California. And the fiery wreck shut down both sides of the freeway for hours. The crash was reported around 1:45 p.m. Looks like this vintage airplane, which is trying to scroll down here. What is
it?
T6
repainted, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, in unusual colors. It looks like it's in painted with German.
Yeah, it was painted
markings.
with
yeah, it was part of a squadron that were painted as a bunch of international aircraft,
T6.
but they were all T6s.
Do the Luftwaffe have them?
Apparently
Apparently
only
so,
now.
yeah.
They've just gotten T6s.
And apparently they don't know how to fly them.
I'm sorry to Fabian and anyone who's German. That was a joke.
Yeah, the California Highway Patrol said that the pilot was doing a test run from Van Nuys and did a loop around the Warner Center. And when they say loop, they do not mean a vertical loop. They mean a circuitous route around the Warner Center, and then started to have engine trouble. And then they, according to, I believe this is from the pilot himself, I picked a spot on the freeway where I knew there was a big section of cars that weren't there. It's an interesting way to put that. But the engine completely failed. Fortunately, I was able to not hurt anybody other than the airplane. Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. He lost control of the plane when landing collided with the center divider. Good Samaritans helped him safely exit the plane. There is a video that is in this article, which we'll have in the show notes, that shows the airplane coming in to land on the highway and kind of hit hard and bounced, and then it goes off frame. We don't really see what happened after that point, but anyway, yep, it's a T6 out of Van Nuys Airport, part of a group of around 6 of them called the Condor Squadron. All T6s, some painted with German markings, some with U.S. markings. I don't know who.
I think they're an air show group. They do staged aerial battle in both paint schemes, something like that.
Okay, interesting. Sad. It looks like that airplane is totaled now. Oh well.
I'm sure the Luftwaffe will be very unhappy.
So this is an interesting one. A C-17 military cargo plane dropped a Humvee on a neighborhood about a mile outside of the drop zone in North Carolina. Yeah, oops.
Did they win it in a prize?
No, but the fortunate thing was that it didn't land on top of anybody or anything, and no one on the ground was hurt. And they were able to retrieve the Humvee, and they don't know why the vehicle was dropped short of or before they were supposed to drop it. I'm sure that whoever was responsible for making that mistake is probably.
They probably have some questions to answer and some paperwork to fill out and maybe some vacation time.
Yeah.
They might be doing push-ups.
Lots of push-ups. Okay.
I think it landed in some trees, actually, didn't it?
It did, yeah. So I guess the trees were damaged.
Yeah, I mean, that part of North Carolina, it's there's a lot of tall pine trees and things around the surrounding towns. So.
I guess they were testing
firewood.
Pardon me?
You say firewood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, firewood. I guess they were testing some kind of a new drop deployment platform, heavy drop deployment platform.
Back to the drawing board, I suspect.
Yeah.
Go back to the old one.
I think that probably the Loadmaster probably pushed the button a little bit too early or something. I don't know. Who knows?
There was a quote in there that the load hadn't been dropped yet, so someone at least is claiming that isn't the case, but it does sort of seem like that's the most likely thing to be.
Yeah.
I hate when you have a premature load drop.
Yeah. And Item D, passenger opens cabin door on plane bound for St. Louis. A passenger on a flight from Mexico to the United States has been detained after he opened a cabin door as the plane was taxiing to the runway. Frontier Airlines Flight 87 was bound for St. Louis, Missouri from Cancun on Monday. when the passenger claimed he was feeling ill and became agitated. And the decision was made to return to the gate, the statement said. As the plane was taxiing, the man became physically violent with a flight attendant and opened a cabin door, which automatically deployed the emergency slide. Kathleen Ingham, a passenger on the flight, said the man went to the front of the aircraft and started kicking the cockpit door and asking to be left off the plane after they left the gate. She said he then pushed a flight attendant and opened a cabin door, which automatically deployed an emergency slide. And this is Frontier, as we all know, flies the narrow-body Airbuses, so it was probably a 320 or 321. Thank God for the brave men and women that held him in the plane, or for sure he would have been sucked into the engine, she wrote in a Facebook post. Anyway, so this is a case where you can actually open the door because the airplane is not pressurized at this point when we're operating on the ground, and it is a miracle that the guy didn't fall out the door. So,
Nick, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is the Airbus a plug type or a
Plug?
Plug. Okay.
but you don't pressurize until after you've taken off, right?
Correct.
I don't think any of us do.
We do.
Unless, excuse me?
Yeah, we have a little partial pressure that once we start applying power.
Yeah, well, that's
But they don't apply. I mean, it's like doing a no-pack takeoff for us. That's the normal operation for them. We rarely do that unless you're taking off from LaGuardia on a hot summer day with a full load. And
Yeah, I mean, the outflow valve's closed, but the sugar scoop's open.
Yeah, but I'm saying that there is a slight bit of positive pressurization. So
that's true. I would agree with that. Thanks.
And then finally, some guy named Dick sent this in. Rob, Rick, Dick, Hamish sent us this.
Rob, Rick, Dick.
Yeah.
Rob, Rick, is Dick.
No. I got enough names. No more names.
Sure thing, Bob.
Rob, Rick, and his Dick.
I think that since he's here and he's the one that sent us this news item, he should read it. He should talk about it.
I agree.
What happened here? Robert?
This is a good one. Brian Andrew McTemes, pilot for Sun Country Airlines, was arrested and accused of having a gun in his carry-on suitcase. The Lee County Sheriff's Office.
That's probably
a headache.
a photo cap.
A Sun Country Airlines pilot was arrested and accused of bringing in a gun to Southwest Florida International Airport Friday night. According to a Lee County Port Authority arrest report, 54-year-old Brian Andrew McTemes was arrested when a TSA agent found a firearm in his carry-on suitcase as he went through security. McTemes of Minnesota told a Lee County Port Authority police officer that he had packed his own bag. Officer found a Kel-Tec 380 pistol in the second zipper pouch on the front of the suitcase. It was loaded with 6 rounds, the report states.
Lovely.
So apparently he declined to answer questions, opting to ask for an attorney. And according to TSA, a passenger may transport an unloaded firearm in a locked hard side container as checked baggage only. So there are 3 or 4 ways there that he was violating it, and apparently he's a pilot. I can confirm he is a pilot for Sun Country, said Kirsten Wanker, a spokeswoman for Sun Country Airlines. But she added, in the interest of respecting the privacy of and preserving the trust of all our employees, we do not comment or confirm details related to individual employee conduct or work performance. And he remains in custody with bail set at $5,000.
Now, I wonder if he were a flight deck federal flight deck officer, it would have stated such in this article, maybe. And I'm not sure what kind of pistols they are issued. If they're a Kel-Tec.
No, it's a 40 cal.
Kel-Tec 380 is a small, like it's a subcompact, very small concealed carry pistol.
Which will do no damage.
Well, I bet you it might do a little damage.
Yeah,
if you put it against your head and pull the trigger, what do you reckon?
That it would, but
I was thinking of other sensitive areas too.
We're going to take one, stick it in Dana's crotch, and see if it causes any damage.
Impossible. That's steel down there.
Yeah, they come from Boston.
Bulletproof. Oh, anyway, so another case of just being an idiot.
Come on.
Yeah. Anyway,
well, I mean, her name says it all.
It does.
Wanker.
It's Wanker.
I think it's Winker.
He's a wanker.
Sorry.
Wanker. I think Rob put a special little spin on it. Okay. And oh, never mind. I was going to hit that. That's what she said. But forget it. All right. That's all of our items in the news folder for today's show. Thank goodness. And now it's time for your feedback. At which point I'd hit the button that would play the feedback thing. Is it time for us to shut this down
I have to go to bed.
at some other point?
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
to right back and I get you to bed.
Yeah, I got to get up early too. So
Get up.
at least we made a dent in this thing. An hour and 40 minutes worth of dent in the actual show.
Excellent.
Yeah. Well, thanks
Glad
everyone.
glad we got things going finally. That was-
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks to Robert.
Thanks for inviting me, guys. Sorry for
Hey, Rob,
the mess.
No, listen,
It was fun. I actually enjoyed it.
it was a lot of hard work there,
I'm surprised.
Yeah.
and we completely understand because
Oh
I
yeah.
think we've all
I get it.
been there and had our share of technical issues. So
Oh, yeah.
thank you for sticking with it and making it work.
I just enjoyed that it wasn't me having the excuse.
There's a little bit of shot and Freud going on there.
Please.
I think one of the most frustrating bits was shouting at you two. Can you hear us? Can you hear us now? Can you hear us? And you're
We
just,
could hear you the entire time.
you never acknowledged.
No, we did.
were.
Trying to find,
We definitely were. You just need to go back and watch that first video, and you will see that we were indeed acknowledging you.
Hearing us, but-
where you were not replying to us, and I don't believe this. You know, stop talking, stop yakking to each other, and listen. Can you hear us?
Where's the love? Where's the love?
No love.
I know.
No love.
What time do you have to get up, Jeff?
Thanks, Jim, for that suggestion. We'll consider that next week for sure.
Down turns day. No, we're not going to talk about that. Nice try, Jim.
Why do I feel like people are just going to send
know,
us the
I
most
mean-
contentious things they can think of to listen to us? Not know what we're talking about, and B, like just fight for, not fight, but go at it a little bit.
Yeah.
That could be fun.
Yeah. I actually enjoyed this whole conversation regarding.
Listen, I like the learning points
Yeah, me too.
always.
Me too. All right. Well, thanks everybody for hanging in there. It's late on a Tuesday night. Thanks everybody in the
only
chat room.
Tuesday.
Jim, really do appreciate your feedback. Seriously, I know I was kidding around with the.
Captain Al's there. He's
Yeah,
about
he
to go to
popped up.
work.
15, 20 minutes ago.
Oh, he did. He's not there
Yeah.
anymore. Okay.
Good morning, Captain Al.
Well, maybe he'll see this after the fact. But anyway, we're going to shut down the stream, and then at some point we'll announce it. We're going to try to finish up this episode so that we can get it out in a few days. So stand by for that. And until then, wishing you clear skies, unlimited visibility, and tailwinds. Take care and God bless.
Cheers, y'all.
Bye, everybody.
See you guys.
Hasta la vista, baby.